The first time I realized my neighborhood HOA was more mafia than management was when I found a strange man tapping on my front window at midnight with a flashlight. He didn't speak, just stared for a second, then walked off like it was normal. I live alone, and let me tell you, nothing about that was normal. My name's Rowan West, 32, electrician by trade, moved into this neighborhood 6 months ago. Bought the house fair and square, paid up front, and didn't expect a middle-aged woman named Cheryl to start treating me like I broke into the place. Cheryl Livingston, president of the HOA, wore pastels like armor and wielded the rulebook like a Bible. Her haircut looked like she threatened the stylist into submission, and she had a voice that could sand paint off drywall. "You didn't get the mailbox approved," she barked at me the first week I moved in. "It's a mailbox. It holds mail. It works." She narrowed her eyes. "It's black. HOA guidelines say deep bronze or sandstone only." I laughed. "I didn't realize I moved into a cult." She didn't laugh. Instead, she started sending me fines, first for the mailbox, then for my trash cans being out 15 minutes too early, then for excessive wind chimes. I had one single chime. I knew something was off when I caught her peeking over my backyard fence with binoculars. She ducked when I made eye contact, but it was too late. I started documenting everything. Security cameras went up that day. Things escalated last week. I came home from work and my front door was wide open. Nothing stolen, nothing broken, but everything was moved. Sofa cushions upside down, cabinets half open. My dog's food dish in the laundry room. It wasn't a robbery, it was a message. I marched straight to Cheryl's porch, rang the bell like I meant it. She opened the door with her smug little HOA clipboard. "Someone broke into my house. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" She didn't blink. "If you're implying the HOA is responsible, that's slander." I leaned closer. "I have cameras now." Her smile twitched. "You're not a good fit for this community, Mr. West. Some neighbors have expressed concerns about your presence." "Oh yeah, which neighbors?" She didn't answer. Just closed the door like a coward. 2 nights later, it got worse. I woke up to banging on my garage door. I grabbed my bat and ran outside. 2 large men I'd never seen before were standing in my driveway, both in black hoodies, one holding a crowbar. "You need to leave," the taller one said. "Excuse me." "You heard me. This neighborhood doesn't want you here." I backed up slowly and pointed at the camera above the garage. "Smile, you're on candid camera." They both bolted, that was it. I drove straight to my dad's place. "Now you need to understand something. My dad isn't just a police officer. He's the chief. Randall West. 30 years on the force, and he doesn't play games." I showed him the footage, the fines, the weird break-in. Everything. He tapped his fingers together and nodded. "She crossed the line. She hired guys to threaten me, Dad." He stood up, grabbed his jacket, and said, "Let's pay your HOA a visit." Dad didn't say much as we pulled up to the HOA office. He parked his cruiser, not his personal car, his cruiser right out front, lights off but badge clearly visible on his belt. The office was a converted room inside the community center, tucked between the tennis courts and the pool, with glass walls and frosted doors. It was empty except for Cheryl, hunched over a stack of papers with a cup of herbal tea beside her. She looked up when we walked in and froze, pen midair. Her expression flickered just for a second before she straightened her back and stood like she had something to prove. "Chief West," she said, voice a little too sweet. "How nice of you to visit. I assume this is about your sons. Misunderstandings." Dad leveled his gaze at her. "Let's not waste time. I want to know who those men were that showed up at my son's property. And I want to know now." "I have no idea what you're referring to," she said, clasping her hands in front of her. "We don't condone any form of harassment. If something happened, maybe it was a misunderstanding with other residents. You know how tensions can rise." "Save it," I cut in. "They told me to leave. You think that's a coincidence?" She didn't answer. Instead, she picked up her tea and took a slow sip. That was her tell. She only drank when she was cornered. Dad stepped forward. We retrieved footage from the security cameras surrounding the neighborhood entrance. The men who approached my son's house were caught on tape arriving in a white SUV registered to your vice president's husband. "Want to explain that?" Her knuckles went pale around the mug. "That vehicle is used by several people." "I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation." "Let's hear one." Dad said. I'll have to consult with our legal advisor, she replied, voice tight. He pulled a folded envelope from his coat and dropped it on the desk. You've got a formal complaint filed against this HOA for endangering a resident, criminal trespass, and conspiracy to intimidate. If you don't cooperate, I'll escalate this to the DA's office. That cracked her shell a bit. Her smile faltered. Now, he continued, I want access to your communications for the past month. Emails, texts, internal memos, everything. If you've got nothing to hide, then there shouldn't be any issue. I'll need to speak with our legal counsel before releasing anything, she said, voice brittle. Dad nodded once. You've got 24 hours. After that, we come back with a warrant. We left without another word. Back at my house, I started combing through the footage again, this time from the past few weeks. I noticed something strange. The same white SUV had driven past my place several times around 2 in the morning on different nights. Never stopping, never speeding, just cruising. Too slow to be random, too frequent to be nothing. I sent the clips to Dad. The next day, he called me at work. You're not gonna believe this, he said. We ran the license plate. The car's been flagged before. Not just traffic violations, connections to a private security contractor. One of those shady off-the-books firms that hire guys with more muscle than morals. Let me guess, I said. Someone in the HOA has ties to it. It gets better. The contractor's registered business address is the same as a real estate investment firm Cheryl's brother owns. We're looking into who's funding what. That night, I was back home rewiring a ceiling fan when my front door rattled. Not knocked, rattled, like someone was trying to open it without a key. I grabbed my phone and checked the app linked to my cameras. A man stood at the door, watching the peephole like he could see through it. He was holding a clipboard and wearing a cheap windbreaker with a fake company logo. I didn't recognize him from the neighborhood. I stayed quiet and hit record. He turned after a minute and walked to my side yard out of camera view. I moved fast, slipped through the back door, and flanked around the house to catch him as he opened my gate. Hey, I shouted. You lost. He jumped a little, then held up the clipboard like a shield. Sorry, sir, just conducting a property survey, HOA business. You're not with the HOA, I said. I know every board member and you're not on it. He hesitated. I was contracted for a zoning inspection. You got ID? He hesitated too long. I took a picture of him with my phone and he bolted. I handed the photo over to Dad. Within 2 hours, they had a name, Marcus Delroy, former military, dishonorably discharged. Current employee of the same contractor tied to Cheryl's brother's firm. That was enough for a judge to sign off on a search warrant. 3 days later, the police raided the HOA's office and Cheryl's home. They seized computers, phones, and documents. The fallout was immediate. Turns out, Cheryl had been using HOA funds to pay under-the-table consultants to intimidate residents she considered problematic. I wasn't the first, just the first who pushed back hard enough. They even found internal memos outlining a plan to drive certain homeowners to sell, so Cheryl's brother's firm could buy the homes cheap and flip them. It was organized harassment, plain and simple. The vice president resigned that night. 2 other board members lawyered up and refused to talk. Cheryl, she tried to play the victim, spun some story about being misled by her advisors and not knowing what the payments were for, claimed everything was taken out of context, but the emails were clear. Her name was on every approval. The DA charged her with conspiracy, misappropriation of funds, and attempted coercion. She was arrested in broad daylight on her own front lawn, still wearing her gardening gloves. The neighborhood watched. Some filmed it. A few even clapped. As for me, I got a letter from the interim HOA board apologizing for the unfortunate events and offering to cover my legal fees. I declined. Instead, I ran for a board seat myself, won by a landslide. At the first meeting, I made sure we passed 2 new bylaws, one limiting the HOA's enforcement powers and another mandating full transparency of all financial transactions. I looked around the room at the people who'd voted for me. Some were neighbors I hadn't even spoken to before. But they'd seen what happened. They knew now, no more unchecked power, no more intimidation, and definitely no more Cheryl, The morning after Cheryl's arrest, I opened my front door to find a folded note wedged between the screen and the frame. No envelope. Just thick, cream-colored paper with a typed message. You've made powerful enemies. I didn't flinch. I carried it straight to the precinct where Dad had already set up a task force to comb through the HOA's financials, staffing records, and communications. The note went into evidence alongside the rest of the mess they were unraveling. By then, the investigation had already turned up something more serious than intimidation and embezzlement. Dad met me in the hallway outside his office, his jaw tight. The contractor Cheryl funneled money to. They're not just running illegal surveillance, they're tied to a fraud ring out of 2 counties over. Wire fraud, fake property transfers, forged deeds. I blinked. They were forging property documents. Yeah. And guess which neighborhood they used as a testing ground? The deeper they dug, the uglier it got. Apparently, Cheryl and 2 now suspended board members had been using their authority to quietly declare select homes, in violation of obscure rules and pushing fines, until owners either left willingly or were forced into default. Then, through a shell company, the homes were purchased at below market value using forged signatures when owners refused to sell. It wasn't just harassment anymore. It was organized real estate fraud. Dad didn't waste time. He met with the county prosecutor that afternoon. By evening, subpoenas were issued for every HOA board member who had voted on property seizures in the last year. Cheryl's brother was picked up at an airport trying to fly to Arizona. They found a burner phone on him full of encrypted messages and a spreadsheet listing over a dozen homes, mine included. Meanwhile, I kept my head down and focused on the new board. The interim president was a retired school principal named Doreen, sharp as a tack and allergic to nonsense. She brought in a forensic accountant to trace every HOA dollar for the past 3 years. What they found floored us. The association had paid over $100,000 to one vendor 47 for security services. There were no contracts, no receipts, no licensing documents. Just a P.O. box in a neighboring town and a dead phone number. That vendor was the front Cheryl used to pay the thugs they sent to my house, and it wasn't just me. A family 2 streets over had been advised by the HOA to move out after their teenage son got into a minor altercation at the community pool. Their house had sold to an LLC listed under the same umbrella firm tied to Cheryl's brother. The family had left because they were scared not just of the HOA but of the strange men who started showing up at night, tapping on their windows, leaving dead plants on their porch. It was a pattern. Dad brought the evidence to the state attorney general's office, and that's when things exploded. An emergency town hall was called, not the kind where people whisper their complaints into a microphone. This one was packed standing room only in the rec center, with news vans outside and deputies at every door. I sat in the front row with Doreen and a few other new board members. Dad stood at the podium, flanked by the AG's lead investigator and a state police captain. We have uncovered evidence of widespread criminal activity carried out under the guise of HOA enforcement, Dad said. Multiple felonies including fraud, coercion, conspiracy, and unlawful entry were committed by individuals entrusted with managing this community. Murmurs swept the room. A few gasps. Someone in the back shouted, "I knew it." Dad didn't flinch. This wasn't just about power, this was about money. Your board, your neighbors, used their positions to manipulate property values and force people out. They hired unlicensed contractors to frighten homeowners into submission, and they did it believing no one would stand up to them. He paused and turned slightly. They were wrong. The AG's investigator stepped forward and laid out the legal plan. Criminal charges for 6 individuals, civil asset forfeiture for properties purchased under forged documents, and a court-appointed trustee to oversee the HOA while the investigation continued. Someone asked the question everyone was thinking. Can we just dissolve the HOA entirely? The investigator shook her head. You can't eliminate the HOA overnight, but you can vote to strip it of discretionary enforcement powers. You can audit it, gut it, and rebuild it from the ground up. That night, The community held its first truly democratic vote in years. By a landslide, we passed the motion to suspend all HOA enforcement actions pending a full review. The new board would hold open meetings, publish all financials, and place every contract under scrutiny. No more fines, no more threats, no more secrets. The next morning, I walked my dog past Cheryl's house. It sat quiet and empty, the lawn overgrown and the mailbox taped shut with a federal seizure notice. Her brother's Range Rover was gone. The house 2 doors down the one they'd forced that family out of had a new sign on the lawn, under state investigation. Do not enter. A week later, I got a letter from the AG's office. I'd been added as a witness in the criminal case and would be testifying about the break-in, the threats, and the fake zoning inspector. They even found 2 more families who had experienced similar harassment but had been too scared to say anything until now. I met with the prosecutor in a downtown office. She was young, sharp, and methodical. She asked about everything: where I found the note, what the men looked like, what Cheryl said the night I confronted her. Then she asked one question I hadn't anticipated. Why do you think they targeted you so aggressively? I thought about it. Because I didn't fold. Everyone else backed off. I didn't, she nodded slowly. That's exactly what they couldn't afford. The trial was set to begin in 6 months. In the meantime, the neighborhood changed. People started talking again, not in whispers but openly, freely. The parents who used to avoid HOA meetings now came with their kids. Lawn chairs and lemonade pitchers showed up on driveways again. Doreen organized a community cleanup and over 40 residents volunteered. No one mentioned the old board. No one needed to. One afternoon, as I was rewiring porch lights for an elderly neighbor, he stepped out and patted my shoulder. You know, he said, when you moved in I thought this guy's gonna get chewed up and spit out, but you flipped the table. I laughed. I didn't flip it, I just nailed it to the floor. He chuckled and went back inside. Weeks passed. Subpoenas turned into charges. More documents surfaced. A hidden ledger in Cheryl's closet revealed even more payments, bribes, hush money, even a payout to a former board member who'd retired after a mysterious garage fire destroyed all his records. The final tally: 11 homes fraudulently acquired, over $200,000 in misappropriated funds, and 3 private contractors arrested for conspiracy and illegal surveillance. Every single one of them had signed contracts bearing Cheryl's initials. The last time I saw her was through a courtroom window. She was in orange, shackled, lips thin and eyes empty. She didn't look like a leader anymore. Just another crook who thought no one would fight back. She was wrong. We weren't just taking back our neighborhood. We were rebuilding it. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not the temperature, the air was fine, but there was this sterile, clinical stillness that made every footstep echo like a gavel. 2 rows behind me sat neighbors I barely knew a few months ago. Now they showed up in carpool groups, whole families taking time off to be here. A few of them clutched folders, evidence, photos, written statements. None of them looked away when Cheryl was led in, her wrists bound in front, her face sagging with a shallow kind of dread. The kind that only shows up when someone realizes they're not walking out the way they came in. I didn't look at her. The prosecutor, Darla Reeves, stood up and began outlining the charges. It took her nearly 10 minutes just to list them: forgery, fraud, coercion, criminal conspiracy, misuse of public authority, and aiding and abetting unlicensed private security in acts of intimidation and trespass. The defense attorney tried to object to the phrasing. The judge didn't even acknowledge it. My name came up early. Darla glanced at me once, quick, professional, not performative, then called me to the stand. I'd practiced this testimony. Not rehearsed, but reviewed. Chronology mattered. Details mattered. Consistency mattered. I described the night I found my door open, the silent rearrangement of my things. The threats, the man Cheryl sent pretending to be a zoning inspector, the clipboards, the fake logos, the SUV that kept circling. Darla asked, "Did you ever receive a formal letter from the HOA stating they were initiating a review of your property for any violations?" "No," I said. "Only illegitimate citations and fines, none of which referenced actual code sections, and none followed due process." She nodded. Did you ever grant permission for anyone to enter your property? My voice didn't waver. Never. When I stepped down, I passed by a woman I hadn't seen before. She wore a charcoal suit and had a worn leather satchel at her feet. She looked at me, then handed a note to Darla without saying anything. Darla read it, blinked twice, and immediately requested a recess. Outside the courtroom, Darla caught up with me and lowered her voice. She's from the State Property Commission. They've uncovered a second ledger, a paper one. Apparently, Cheryl's brother kept hard copies in a storage facility under a dummy business. One of the units had maps and dates. 10 properties marked as reclaimed. Yours was the last one added. I felt my jaw tighten. What do you mean, reclaimed? They were labeling homes as abandonment reclamations, filing phony internal declarations that the properties had been surrendered by owners, then using forged quitclaim deeds to transfer them to their shell company. That's not just fraud, I said. That's land theft, Darla nodded. Exactly, and it's now under federal review. Back in the courtroom, the pace shifted. Darla introduced the new evidence through the commission rep, who testified with a dry, direct tone that made the whole room lean in. She described how the maps were color-coded by acquisition stage. Mine was red. 2 others were already in green, finalized. She said the signatures on the deeds were traced overlays from DMV records. The judge asked whether this was part of a larger statewide pattern. She said, "At this point, we believe this neighborhood was a pilot scheme, but there are signs it was intended for expansion." The courtroom went silent. Darla then called a man I hadn't seen before, tall, wiry, with a slight limp. He introduced himself as Paul Kinney, former contractor for the security firm Cheryl funneled money to. He looked nervous, but his voice was steady. "I was recruited to observe certain properties," he said, "and report on occupant patterns, when they were home, when they weren't. Whether they used their yards, whether they had guests." The judge interjected, "Was this surveillance legal?" "No, Your Honor, we weren't licensed. We weren't even uniformed. We were told to avoid cameras and to make the residents feel watched, not harmed, just unsettled." Darla asked, "Who gave you your instructions?" He hesitated. "Then, Cheryl Livingston. She met us twice, directed us to specific houses. She said it was HOA business and that the board had legal authority to act." The defense tried to object to hearsay, but the judge overruled. Paul had recorded one of the meetings. He played a snippet, and there was Cheryl's voice, clear, clipped, unmistakable. "They don't belong here. They're not compliant. Show them they're not welcome." At that, several people behind me murmured. The judge banged his gavel once and called for order. By the end of the week, testimony had been heard from 6 residents. Each of them recounted escalating fines, sudden code violations appearing out of nowhere, and late-night disturbances that couldn't be traced. One man, a Gulf War veteran, described how floodlights were aimed into his windows at night by unknown individuals. A nurse described how her handicap-accessible ramp was repeatedly vandalized until she moved out. But the most devastating testimony came from a teenage girl. She took the stand with her mother beside her. They had been the ones forced out after the incident at the pool. She spoke softly, but every word hit like a hammer. "They made my parents feel like criminals," she said. "They said we were disturbing the community, that we didn't match the image they wanted. Then people started showing up, first just watching from the street. Then they rang our doorbell and walked away. My dad installed cameras. They got ripped down." Her mother added, "We sold because we were scared. We didn't even get full value. The offer came from a company we couldn't trace. We just wanted to be safe." After they stepped down, Cheryl's attorney tried to dismiss their experience as unfortunate but unconfirmed. The judge shut that down immediately. "We're past the point of denial," he said. "We're now confirming the depth." The trial concluded the following Monday. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Cheryl was found guilty on all 12 counts. Her sentencing was scheduled for later that month, with prosecutors pushing for the maximum. Her brother's charges were expanded to include interstate fraud and conspiracy against multiple homeowners associations. The private security firm was dissolved by state order, with its executives facing charges of unlicensed operations and participation in racketeering. 3 former HOA board members accepted plea deals in exchange for testifying about the internal structure of the scheme. They admitted to receiving monthly bonuses disguised as travel reimbursements and voting on property seizures they knew were fabricated. The court also approved a motion to dissolve the existing HOA charter and place the community under temporary state oversight until a new structure could be formed from the ground up. Not reformed, rebuilt entirely. The neighborhood wasn't the same anymore, but in the best way. A few weeks after the trial, I hosted a cookout in my backyard, not for show. Just burgers, music, and chairs pulled from whoever had extras. Families wandered in and out. Someone brought a cornhole set. Kids chased each other under the string lights I'd run from my roofline. Doreen, now officially our elected community liaison, came by with a new proposal. No president, no fines, just a volunteer council to mediate disputes and organize events. Zero enforcement power. People are still wary, she said as we stood near the grill. But they're showing up. That's something, I nodded. Let's keep it that way. Later, Dad dropped by off-duty in jeans and a faded ball cap. He grabbed a plate, sat down, and watched the kids run by. Didn't expect to see this here again, he said. Me neither, I told him. He looked around, then leaned back in his chair. You know, in all my years, I've seen corruption in city halls, precincts, even charities. But this was personal. They weren't just stealing money. They were trying to erase people, replace them. They failed, I said. He nodded once. Because someone fought back. Not long after, I got a letter from the State Property Commission. It wasn't legal, it was personal. A thank you, signed by every investigator who worked the case. They'd never seen a local stand up with that much documentation, that much persistence. They called it a model case. I didn't frame it, didn't need to. The neighborhood was the real proof. No more surveillance. No more shadow meetings, just people living, talking, trusting again. And every time someone new moved in, they heard the story about the guy the HOA tried to scare off. And how he flipped the script because his dad ran the police department and because he refused to be quiet.